Okay, I think we're live now. Good morning, folks. Welcome. My name is Lewis. I'm here with BoSTEM Virtual Career Chats. If you're joining us, welcome. Happy to have you join us on this lovely Friday afternoon. As you know, our STEM chats have been giving us a lot of value these past couple of weeks. And today we have another special guest who's here to talk about her pathway into a STEM career that's fairly interesting with the BoSTEM program. As you know, we are focused on career inspiration for our middle school and high school students. And so our career chats today are an opportunity for our participants to learn about what they can implement in their strategies and plans for their future. Today we have a special guest, Beth, who's joining us from Boston University. And I don't want to say too much about Beth. She'll jump in to share about her story and what she's sharing with us today. But welcome, Beth. Super excited to have you join us for STEM Chats. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. My name is Beth Haley. I'm actually a PhD student at Boston University right now at the School of Public Health. I grew up in the Boston area. I'm from Reading, Mass, which is just north of the city. And I actually went to BU as an undergrad also. And I'm now what they call a double terrier, since the Boston Terriers are the mascot. But I did a lot in between undergrad and grad school, and I honestly never really intended to go into the sciences, certainly not when I was in middle school or high school. I was really interested in history and intended to go to school, maybe be an archaeologist or study ancient languages and ancient civilizations. But what happened is I took a first semester of Greek literature and myth or mythology and some other history courses. And I started feeling like I wanted my focus to really be how to help people, even though history is super important and it's really important for us to understand where we came from and where different societies, how they evolved. I really wanted to be helping people in the future. And so that actually started me down a science path, because I thought about being a physician. I thought about being a vet. But eventually I actually ended up majoring in conservation biology, which is trying to preserve and conserve the natural resources and the ecosystems on this planet. And during those years, I got very almost anti-society in a way. That sounds really bad, but I'll explain what I mean. As humans, we have a huge impact on the planet. You can think about all the pollution, you can think about climate change, you could think about the footprint of our cities and towns. And I really, in those years, was siding with the wildlife and the forests and the oceans that are being impacted by humanity. And so after college, I went out to Western Colorado, where I worked on a ranch they had sponsored their own research program so they could understand what was happening on their landscape. And they were trying to find a way to balance human needs and the needs of the natural landscape and the ecosystem and the plants and animals that live there. That was very interesting. And I actually ended up getting a master's while I was out there working in environmental education so that we could better inform people and encourage them to think about the natural world more and get excited about it. And after that, I wanted to get more into the hard sciences after my environmental education work. I wanted to start doing research again. So I went to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I worked in a plant ecology lab. And so this lab was particularly interested in how plants interact with the microbes that live in the soils and actually live within the plant. So there's different fungi that live in the leaves and the roots of plants and are sometimes very helpful to the plants, and they're sometimes very detrimental and actually end up living like parasites within the plants. So that was my focus there. And I started volunteering at the same time for a local nonprofit that on TED Talks, similar to really popular TED Talks, only this was really local in Albuquerque. I love that so much because I got to know the community better. I was working with all sorts of people all the time that I actually ended up doing that for a job for a little while, and coordinating events and working with speakers and thinking about big ideas that were going to change the world or change the community, or even different ways to live your own life. And during that time, I learned more and more about public health and about water quality and health. And there's only a few things I feel like are absolutely no argument basic rights for humans. And one of them absolutely is the right to clean water. And so I decided to go back to school and study public health. Specifically, I'm in environmental health. So it's a part of public health that thinks about all the different inputs from our environments or from our environment that impact our health. So it's pretty broad and can range from air pollution, water pollution, to things like the physical and built environment that we live in, how we move around in the landscape, what transportation looks like. So now that I'm back in school, I'm looking at water quality and human health, and particularly focused on part of our water infrastructure in a lot of the cities in New England and other places in the US that have combined sewer systems. And these systems are old, they're in older cities, and basically stormwater and all the sewage from houses and other industrial places get combined into one pipe. And when there's big rain events, there's so much stormwater that those systems have to overflow. Otherwise, they would back up into our homes. And so they overflow into rivers and lakes. And so we have raw sewage going into rivers and lakes. And a lot of these have been fixed over the years, and there's different ways to work with them. Like in Boston, we don't have very many of these district events anymore. But up north of Boston in the Merrimack River, sort of northern Massachusetts and southern New Hampshire, there's still a lot of these combined sewer overflows, is what they're called. And it's pretty gross, and people are using that water for drinking water and to recreate in.
Oh boy.
And I'm trying to better understand like the health risks associated with that. That's sort of my background.
Very important work. Oh my gosh, Beth, that is such a cool experience. I mean, I definitely hear a theme of let's figure it out. Let's try this. Let's follow this passion. Curiosity is definitely the foundation of your experiences here.
Absolutely. And trying to figure out solutions. There's a bit of a tension in science sometimes between doing basic research that is really important and is dedicated towards building knowledge and better understanding the world. And then there's more applied research, and that is trying to fix problems that exist or think about specific management strategies, depends what field you're in. And I'm somewhere in between, but I really think the applied piece is very important because so many environmental challenges that the world faces right now, and a lot of them are tied into the health of humans and more broadly, the health of the planet.
Very, very cool. I mean, that perspective in itself is just so cool because you can scale down and scale up and still see how the impact varies on those different levels. So cool. Beth, I don't want to talk too much about, the day-to-day work that you do, but I'm really curious to know, what is the favorite part of your typical day, considering that you are back in school and starting to, pursue a PhD program. What does your day-to-day look like, and what is your favorite part?
Well, I'm sort of right in this transition right now. So for a lot of PhD programs, you focus on classes first couple of years. And then as you finish your classes, you move more into doing your research. And so I'd started my research a little bit while I was taking classes, but now that I'm almost done with classes, I'll be doing more research going forward. So classes are very similar to college classes, but more specialized. So a lot of basic introductory public health classes, because I was coming in without that kind of background. But then I also took some water quality and health classes, wastewater and health classes, thinking about different ways to quantify risk. That's like a whole field in and of itself. But now that I'm moving out of classes, I spend more time on research, and that really varies person to person, like even among graduate students. For me, I'm doing a little bit of field work, so I'm actually going out and collecting water samples, trying to understand different microbial contaminants, so specifically bacteria and viruses that are in the water. And so that involves taking a kayak out up to the Merrimack and like getting into the river and
So cool.
scooping up the water and taking it to a lab. We've great partners who do the lab work for us. And then the other part of my work is doing a lot of background research. So a lot of reading, a lot of finding articles that have been published in this space before, so that I know what's been done before and what novel or like new pieces I can bring to this research. And then our work is also based in, it's collaborative with the communities and some community organizations that are up in that area. And there's a lot of people who are trying to figure out how to clean up the Merrimack in different ways. And so sometimes I have meetings or go to conferences or have brainstorming sessions with different groups that are based up in the Merrimack as well. And I really love that part of my work. I think that's not all scientists get to work with people or stakeholders, people who have an interest in the problem you're working on.
Mm-hmm.
But I really do, and that's I want to keep that as an important part of my work going forward.
So cool. I mean, I'm just so excited and flabbergasted as to how innovative that field is. I mean, you're outside collecting samples, in the field, and working with the water and the environment and nature, and then you're also translating that with stakeholders and lab work and research. I mean, it's the best of both worlds, if you ask me.
I agree. I really like it.
So cool. Beth, it just lends me to ask you, so, it seems as though you work more so individually as opposed to in teams. Could you talk to us a little bit more about what it's like to problem solve in your work? Are you doing that more so on an individual basis? Are you working with teams? I know you mentioned stakeholders. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that skill of collaboration and communication with others in the STEM community?
Absolutely, yeah. And actually, I think I work with teams a lot, and mostly, so especially as a graduate student, but also in previous work, there's a lot of advisors who are part of any type of big project like this, and especially when you're working in a space that's interdisciplinary, meaning that it really goes across traditional fields. I mean, this really is environmental science, it's public health, it's hydrology, there's some engineering, like civil engineering in there, understanding the infrastructure, microbiology. I mean, all of these pieces are there, and no one person is an expert in any of those spaces or all of those spaces. And so it's really important to be able to collaborate with people who have different types of backgrounds and knowledge, so that as a team, you're much stronger. So I actually don't really feel like I'm a strong expert in any of these spaces, but I work with a lot of people who know a lot about more narrow areas, like more specific areas.
Mm-hmm.
And all of us working together is what really makes this work. So in this particular role now, I work with people who are like place-based experts, so people who really know the Merrimack well. There's a fascinating history up in the Merrimack. It's the river that was harnessed for a lot of the textile mills, like in Lowell and Lawrence. And so there's a fascinating history up there. I have to rely on all of the engineers and water operators that I talk to, because that is not my background at all. My advisor has a toxicology background, and she works a lot with water and water pollution. So she really understands how different contaminants, different kinds of pollution can impact human health. I work with another advisor who measures nutrients in rivers. And so she thinks a lot about how rivers work and how they integrate with, or how they, when they meet oceans, what different processes are happening. in terms of chemical and physical processes.
Mm-hmm.
So she's really helpful in terms of like sampling and understanding how the river works. And then I have another advisor who works in economics and watershed management and planning. And so she has a systems level mindset where she sees the whole watershed as a system, because one river actually drains a large portion of land, and everything that runs off of that land ends up in the river. And so even though there are state boundaries and town boundaries and even country boundaries, that river is one watershed. And so all of that water ends up in the same place. And so you really need to be thinking about it as a big system, not just as, one little component of it. So I love working with teams. I would say one of the most challenging things is that everybody has a different perspective, but that's the great benefit. And so I think one of the most important skills with working with teams is really learning to listen, and always looking to learn the collaborators around you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I asked that question, Beth, and you're highlighting a very important piece here for our students who might be listening. STEM, we understand, is a difficult kind of discipline to pursue, whether it be science, engineering, technology, or math. And so oftentimes our students who excel, or, who we consider STEM scholars, might feel as though they need to take all of these challenges or problems on their own, right? Like they're just like, oh, I don't have that skill, so I need to, figure that out on my own. But what we're hearing from you and many other STEM chats is that the STEM community is so collaborative. There are people who specify in specific things, and that is what kind of helps build the team to, really work together and put forward a really promising solution. And so I just thank you for echoing that and reinforcing to our students that you're not in this alone. We understand that it is difficult, but there's tons of support in the STEM community. As you mentioned, a multitude of advisors on one project just to kind of really understand how to best solve, real world issues, because they're really important.
Right, absolutely. And I think that when you go through school and you're being tested on all sorts of different subjects, it's hard to remember that in the future, when you go into your career, you don't have to be an expert in everything, but all of that baseline education really helps you in understanding those other collaborators. So I'm not a chemist. I haven't taken chemistry for a really long time, but because I did take chemistry and I remember some of it, I'm able to talk about, nutrients in the river and understanding why they might be impacting different elements of that water quality. And so that kind of stuff is really important. And that's why your education sets you up to be able to talk to others in a broad field.
Right, definitely. It's a skill in itself, right? Like you're not only learning chemistry, but it's a language that you can use to communicate to people to, again, highlight another perspective. I mean, I'm just loving this conversation. Beth, I just thank you so much for sharing your story. We are nearing our time here for the STEM chat, and I want to give you an opportunity to close us out here. Our students who might be joining us are learning a lot about what it means to be a conservation biologist, or just what it means to study or to pursue a PhD degree. What advice would you have for students who are interested in a career like yours, considering that they are in middle school and high school and that we are in the summer months? What advice would you give them?
I think one of the things that I would have really wanted to hear when I was in middle school or high school is that you don't have to have it all figured out. It's really important to keep yourself open to different opportunities that you learn along the way. If I had picked a career based on what I was interested in my senior year of high school, I would be, studying ancient Mesopotamia or, wanting to be in an archaeological dig in Egypt. And that's fascinating, but I've come so far from that. And it was really important for me to keep my mind open. If I was picking a career based on the end of college, I would probably be working for the National Park Service or the Forest Service and trying to conserve our natural resources. And even now as a PhD student, I recognize that I'm working on this particular problem. I'm really interested in water issues. I'm really interested in sort of health of humans and also health of the environment. And I think that's where I'm going to go for a career. But I'm also really open to understanding, like, maybe I'm going to get really engaged in policy work in the future. And instead of working on research specifically, I'll be thinking more about different rules and regulations that protect our ecosystems. Or maybe I'll get really interested in some other local issues, like fires are a really big problem out west, of course, wildfires, and they can impact water quality out there. So more of a regional issue than what I'm working on now. So I think if you just leave yourself open and know that it's going to be a journey. I've never talked to any professional who has not said that their path, let me rephrase that. Every professional I've ever talked to says that their path is circuitous. Like it moves around. It's not linear. It's not point A to point B. There's a bunch of steps in between, and very few people, I think, end up exactly where they expected to.
So powerful. Students, if you're listening, I mean, Beth's advice is so important. It's okay not to know right now. There's a lot of uncertainty with the pandemic and the summer months, and with school next fall. We understand that. But understand, with Beth's advice of staying open and understanding that it's okay not to know. Things can change drastically, from month to month or even from year to year. So just being receptive to that and open and understanding that, your passion is what should serve as the foundation is so important. Beth, I can't thank you enough for your story, your message, and your advice today for our participants. Thank you again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Of course. Students, that brings us here to the end of our STEM chat. Thank you so much for joining us. If you would like to continue this conversation with Beth and want to know more about how to pursue a PhD program, or just interested to learn more about conservation biology, environment, or just want to speak with Beth a little bit more about her experiences, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to loop folks up with Beth to continue this conversation offline. However, as you know, these sessions will continue on for the rest of the season, so please spread the word along to your friends, colleagues, educators, even coworkers. We want everyone and anyone in the STEM community to tap into these virtual opportunities and build this community that we are finding to be so prevalent in the professional world. So we want to bring that to our students in a virtual context. Thank you again for supporting us with these virtual opportunities. Thank you, participants, for joining us on this Friday morning. And I just wish that everyone stays healthy and happy during this pandemic season.